Meeting being recorded. Swing.
Hello, hello. Hello. Let's just take a few minutes to gather. Okay. Wait for one more minute. And we can start. Would be nice if you would turn on your cameras to see your faces so that we feel that we are not alone here. But there's an audience. A few people joining. Okay, I think we can start. Hello everyone, good evening. Nice to see you here. And this is a very final workshop for Hemi Incubator. And I think today's topic is a perfect one to end the sessions, the workshop sessions, because today we'll be talking about how you could move on from the startup phase to the kind of business phase, or what is the process and what are the different obstacles you will probably face during the process, and how to get over it, basically. So I'm very happy that Jake is here to talk about his experience and give some tips and tricks how to survive in this startup business. So please, Jake, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Marilee. Good to see you all. This is really a reaction. I'm very conscious that we're at the end of this series, and what I'll be doing is digging into some of the basis of successful startups. So kind of looking back to where they started, the likes of Amazon. And the point of that is not so much to learn from where they made changes along their journey as how they had core principles and values baked in from the start. And I find a lot of problems with startups in the last few years, maybe last 5 years, has been that as more and more people are attempting to start startups for various reasons, including that conventional work has become a lot harder to come by. A job for life is kind of scarce. And so the visions for often being involved in a startup isn't necessarily, oh, we've got this amazing idea, we need to implement it and solve problems. It can be that would be a nice lifestyle or a nice thing to do. and I found a nice idea. So really what I want to focus on today is the mental state and capacity of founders. And rather than looking at points of pivot through the history of a startup, so for example, an investor suggested, let's no longer do this, let's do that, or feedback from customers was like, we'd love it if you could help us with a different problem. The pivot thing normally, when it's successful, is quite obvious. And what happens is people look to pivot when the business isn't working. And I think what they're better off doing when the business isn't working, when it's not finding adoption, when it's not finding customers, is going back to core principles and reinventing from the ground up what they're doing and why they're doing it, to look through stuff. So it might feel to some of you that I'm going backwards a bit to earlier stages in where you're at, but hopefully it's about refreshing the thought process you had at that initial optimistic stage, so that either currently or in future, when you encounter a stage where things get a bit more difficult, rather than being put off and thinking, oh, we've got to change everything, we've got to pivot, we've got to get out of here, you can go, well, why did we start this? Why are we actually doing this? So obviously a business is all about generating profits, and it's a very obvious statement, but I think it needs to be underlined that often the point where startups get into trouble is where the investor or the founder is thinking, we're not making any money out of this. So the founder can be worried about how they're going to pay their bills, and the investor can be worried about if they put any more money in, would it just disappear? So at some point, profits become a bit of a focus, and bizarrely, they're often not the focus at an early stage. You guys have mostly grown up in an era where people could create businesses. Famously, Google did this, where Google wanted to index the world's information. They didn't necessarily have a business model for that. And then as they built up all these links of information, they started to realize that people were searching for things related to retail. So the advertising component of Google search, which is where they made all their money, was kind of an accidental thing. What Google was doing was on a mission to index the world's information. So you couldn't even say they were solving a problem. They just had a high level optimistic view of what can we do with technology. That's often a very successful approach, but I think it's become too fashionable amongst startups and founders not to actually think where the revenue's coming from day one. And the more successful businesses on average start out with a very clear financial vision. Certainly Amazon did that from the beginning, that Amazon had a very clear eye on profit. Google slightly anomalous, Facebook again slightly anomalous. It was started as a sort of social network amongst students, and then based on a philosopher, René Girard, one of their early stage investors, Peter Thiel, a legendary Silicon Valley investor, thought, yeah, this taps into desire. So it's possible that the early founders of Facebook didn't realize what they had, but the early investors did. That they recognized that what Facebook was doing, that at the point where I went on Facebook to see what Marilee was up to, and then I thought she was going to a cool restaurant or something, then I'd want to also go to a cool restaurant. And so you had this psychological action happening on Facebook that wasn't based on the obvious functionality of Facebook, which was to share information between people who knew each other. It then, the profit margin came from it, from the behavior of once you start sharing information. Instagram has taken that even further, that people start to signal how fun their lifestyle is through that. So early investors in Facebook had an understanding of why there was going to be a load of money there. One of the things to think about in trying to generate profits is competition. A thing that a lot of startups get wrong is they haven't done their research. I see so many startups that are in a space where they're like, we found this problem, we're going to solve it. And if I mention some of the people who've tried that previously, or some of the people who are already working on it, they've not heard of them. And then that immediately causes them to lose credibility in front of investors, but also suggests that they aren't seeing what other people are getting right or wrong in addressing that problem. Now, it doesn't matter at what stage you're at in a startup. There's always time to think that the competition is out there. So what you want to do as a startup is believe that you have the best product, the best market fit, the best solution, but you should also allow a lot of humility in to then go and look at who else is doing what and how are they doing it. And that was one of the keys to Apple, was Steve Jobs looked to do computing in a different way. He wasn't providing necessarily better computers, but by working with the designer and by focusing on a small product range, he managed to establish in the concept of his consumers that he was doing something different. So he very much fed off understanding what the competition were doing rather than he had a vision of where he was going. Competition is actually quite bad, that it eliminates profits, it lowers your prices and margins because there's competition out there. Your customer can shop elsewhere. So do try and find things where there isn't competition. I just want to underline that point, that at any stage in a startup's development, from day one through to a 10-year-old unicorn company, it's important to always keep assessing where the competition's coming from. The way Google do that is they were convinced long before ChatGPT was launched and AI search engines came along that they wouldn't be able to succeed forever as a search engine company. So they've judiciously invested in Waymo, which is driverless taxis, health. They've started doing the following Apple. They've got the Fitbit watches, and they're looking in loads of other areas to make money. So that was a very smart decision that Google took, that they were like, we're making a load of money, but the competition will come along and change things over time. So on your journey as a startup, it's really essential, particularly looking at different rounds of investors, to think, where's the competition going to come from? I'm not proposing that you have a solution. You say, oh, in 10 years' time, when we face competition, we can move to another market. It's being aware at all times of who your competitors are, even if you think that they have a less good product. It's very hard for investors and customers to differentiate between why your product is better than someone else's. There's a kind of very human weakness of comfort in saying, oh no, we know we're better. If you look at your competitors and you give them respect and you understand what they're doing well, you will learn things. Specialization is a good way to get around competition by having a different niche, which is what Apple does, that their niche is they're more expensive, they're better design, their users assume that they have a higher quality. That's probably not true, but there is a perception that they do. Apple did a very good job of creating a niche. So within the personal computer market, there's kind of HP, Google, everyone else, and then there's Apple. So specialization is often a really good way to succeed in a competitive space. And it's worth identifying what your niche is to specialize. So startups are often spending too much time, where my earlier point was about where's the profit going to come from. They're often spending too much time thinking ahead to scaling profits. And you can, by specializing, by looking at niche areas, build up skills and services that then you can apply to other areas of the industry. We'll come back to that a bit later on. So the key word that we're trying to push home to you today is adoption. Why would the customer choose you? What have you done that's better than what everyone else is doing? And this is the point to keep challenging yourselves with every morning. I find I'm working at the moment with a European startup, which we raised a bunch of money last July. And then the investor came back and put more money in around about Easter time this year. And we're just spending it all on more and more engineers, because the engineers are focused on solving their problem. And we have a discussion internally within the company at the moment of like, well, if we just get bogged down on how we solve the problem and make the most elegant software, we won't really be addressing how we fit into the market, how we end up with our marketing process down the line. So something I'm trying to look at the moment for that company is if we assume that the engineers solve these problems and then we go to market, what's our go-to-market strategy? And it's very difficult for everyone else in the company to focus on that. And it's a really key thing as a founder of a startup to sit down a couple of times a week and just say, wherever you're at in the process, whether you're going forward, sideways, or backwards, how am I going to find ways to get this product into the market? The unique selling point is value creation, and that avoids competition. Coming up with something that's unique. So Google achieved monopolistic status in search because they had the best search engine. There were other search engines available, such as Yahoo, Ask Jeeves, etc. Microsoft had various attempts at it. But Google, by having the best algorithms and the fastest responses, managed to push out the competition. So think about what your competitors are doing, but also focus really hard, sometimes through niche, on building a unique space for yourself. Once you've established some sort of revenue, some sort of consumer base, a moat, a defensive circle around the startup becomes really important. And these things you often they're thought about too late, that people will build software, build products, build physical products that can't then be scaled. There is a company in Nashville that makes components to protect guitar amplifiers from surges in electricity that would damage the guitar or the amplifier. And they're obsessed at the moment with how they're going to get ahead of production. So at the moment, there's a small cottage industry in Nashville making probably 1,000 units a month, but they're relentlessly looking into India, looking into China, and working out how they can scale production in 2 or 3 years' time if demand goes up. They're not trying to get ahead of themselves by making sales and promises to global distributors without knowing how they can build economies of scale in future. What they've done really well, they call themselves Brown Box, is create a really clear, simple branding proposition where they use social media to put their staff on who are making these components and express that they're kind of old school, old-fashioned technology for musicians, that's a vibe musicians like. So it's never too early to think about how we're going to scale these things and make things more cheaply down the track. And where is our brand? How have we got a clear brand? The company I'm working with in Germany at the moment is possibly too focused internally on what we're doing in terms of engineering and not so focused on how we go out to market. A standard question from investors will be, what is the problem you are solving? And this to me is often the biggest wrinkle point, that customers don't always know they have a problem. And so I've seen it many, many times, particularly with so-called music tech, people coming with solutions for the music industry that they're like, this doesn't work. The music industry is a train wreck. Lots of things don't work. But when people come on along with logical and good solutions, the industry, for various reasons that are often kind of cultural or political, won't adopt those solutions. I had an incident recently of somebody taking in a USB key with a bunch of data in it that they scraped from the web to a major music rights holder and saying, we believe that if you use this data, you will earn $20 million in extra revenue, and we will sell you the USB key, sell you the data for $2 million. And it's conditional that you just give us a percentage of the royalties that you unlock and recover, and we won't just give you the USB key, we'll give you the software and we'll manage it for you. So they used a very good way of having a meeting. It's basically saying to someone, hey, I can find 20 million bucks for you for 10%. They didn't get the deal. And a lot of the reasons that they didn't get, and they were shocked and they didn't understand it, and they reached out to various specialists in the space, and after 6 months they still got nowhere, because there's friction within the music industry against innovation. There's often to do with how people are employed, It's often to do with standard practices, people looking short term, just want to get to the end of the year, don't want to pay out for things. So that was an extreme example where I've seen people come up with the famous phrase, build a better mousetrap. I've seen people build a better mousetrap and it not get used. And that then often becomes like a mind-boggling moment for the startup founders, that they're like, what do you mean you don't want our amazing mousetrap that we've built for you? We've solved this problem that you had. And it becomes a real mental block for the founders, that they then can't understand why they're not getting adopted. What they need to do is ask questions, and what they tend to do is lecture. So they're like, you don't understand, this is much better than what you're currently using, or look, I've got all this data that shows you you're missing all this money. People don't always like that approach, being told by someone from the outside, I've solved all your problems, I've figured everything out. So be very careful about assuming that because you've solved a problem, you're going to your solution will be adopted. Think very clearly as well on geography, that who is going to be your long-term customers. There's a lot of opportunity in Europe at the moment, but most of the growth is happening in Latin America, North Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, being that India, and Southeast Asia has a lot of the biggest growth companies. Think early on about how you can get into those markets, and particularly in the music space, the way those industries operate is quite different from the way the European industries operate. And I intentionally left out North America there because it's a very crowded space. So I would think, how can I get links into particularly Southeast Asia at the moment? The issue you have there is obviously the revenues, the fees that they can pay are lower than the fees that the US can pay. But it's a space that you can get in, this earlier point about niche and focus and develop things. So really you're thinking about the long-term value of customers and building up a customer base wherever they are in the world, and testing your product on them then makes it much easier to go into the major markets. Revenue is a product of, you can either be selling assets, so you could sell code, software, sell the business either to another company, B2B, or sell bits of it off to consumers. You can sell products, so Apple selling computers and phones, licensing, record labels licensing music to streaming platforms like Spotify. You can get revenue, particularly as an artist, music artist, from advertising and influencing, or from ticketed events and experiences. So it's really important with every startup to think not just in terms of revenue being money at the bank, the profit and loss, but what is actually, where do we make our money from? What are we making our money out of? So with Google, they didn't know what they were making the money out of, and then eventually it was advertising, and they effectively became an auction place, a marketplace for advertisers, so that you can go on to, say, YouTube as a creator and sell space on your video to an advertiser who wants to reach the viewers of your video. So in that case, Google is the middleman. So they certainly didn't think when they were setting up as a search engine that they would be a middleman between buyers and sellers, effectively selling advertising, selling eyeballs. Revenue is a key performance indicator, but what are the others? Metrics, how many people you have as customers, is very tangible and becomes very useful with further investment. That's a really hard target to go for, to say we want to reach a lot of customers. I think engagement metrics, feedback from our customers, is partly tangible in that you can do surveys and you can introduce investors to your customers for the customer to explain why they like the product and what's going on. So you can, to an extent, demonstrate engagement with your product. Subscriber number of customers, you can show it exactly on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet. Trust is intangible. I think that's a really important thing to build up. And it's a place where founders often go wrong. I refer you back to what I was saying a few minutes ago about the amount of times I've sat there with startups who don't understand why somebody won't use their better mousetrap. And you can see the trust dissipates because they also, the founder almost presents to the potential customer an attitude of, you, the customer, don't know what you're doing because you're not paying us for this amazing thing that we've built for you. And that really erodes trust. So keep trust, which is intangible, but is as powerful as having a bunch of customers in raising investment and getting key investors in. Keep that to the front. And it's particularly hard to remain trustworthy. Is not about being honest. Of course, it's that. But in addition, it's also how you present yourself, how you communicate, not hassling people, going back to them promptly. If you haven't heard from them after a while, send them a brief email. Hey, just checking in. Hope everything's cool. Would love to know your thoughts on that. Too often I get long emails saying, we believe this, and they're repeating stuff they've already said. And I kind of lose trust because they sound nervous. All of those factors add up to what their brand is. When an investor looks at a startup, they're thinking across how many customers have they got, what's the customer satisfaction, what's the engagement, and do I trust them with these key people? You may have heard, I'm sure you have heard that thing so many times, that investors invest in the people, not the idea, because good people will go on and have a good idea. So really try, when you're having difficult times as a startup in getting adoption or raising money, focus on your brand integrity and keeping it that way. We've been talking here about selling a solution to a problem. Is that the hardest thing to achieve in building a business? Is that all you need, is a great idea, a concept? So if you turn up and say, hey, we've seen music publishing has this issue and we've solved it, or musicians looking to connect with other musicians or services have a problem and we've solved it, is that all you need? In, I think, 1909, Henry Ford set up the Ford Motor Company. And at the time, most people used cars. Automobiles were a scarcity, and he basically wanted to make them replace the horse. And what he famously said at the time, I think it's more people have reverse engineered this quote, but it applies to what he was thinking, even if he didn't say it, is that if he'd asked the customers what they'd have wanted, they would have said they wanted a faster horse. What would you want instead of a horse? They'd said a faster horse. So they weren't yet ready for what became the motor car. How he got in and competed was he dropped the price of motor cars. So he focused a lot on the production line, which lowered the price of cost of production of cars. He was so focused on lowering the price of production that he famously, and this he did say, was he said, when one of his salesmen came back and said, this customer doesn't want the car like that, they want a roof on it, not open, this one wants it in red, he said, any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it's black. So Ford was really focused on the production line and that process to create a lower price and outcompete even horses on price. So he made his product so cheap that he achieved wide-scale adoption and was basically the pioneer of large-scale sales of cars. About 6 years after he said that, the guy doing some research for General Motors said that what the customer wanted, so Ford was ignoring what the customer wanted and just coming up with a different approach, but focusing on price so that they would adopt it. What General Motors customer research showed was that customers wanted different price points, different color schemes, different types of cars. They wanted variety and choice. So that was exactly the opposite to what Ford was saying with his, let's focus on just keeping the price down, we'll just make them all black. After Ford had established the mass consumption of cars through the beginning of the 20th century, you then got, he got to 66% of the market share. And then that dropped at the point where General Motors started offering a variety of cars at different price points. So sometimes more expensive than Ford and certainly offering different colors. So this is a competition thing coming in, that what GM did was they were like, well, if we go and compete with Ford on price and model, we're just in a race to the bottom. It's going to be really difficult. That point I made earlier on, that when you're aware of what your competition is doing, you don't necessarily want to directly compete with them. So GM grew their market share, as did other companies, and Ford's market share collapsed because Ford didn't adapt. It took them till 1926 to figure out that their model that had been so successful was losing out because consumers wanted greater choice. What Elon Musk has done with SpaceX and the Starship thing is we've gone from, in the 1960s and 1970s, the US building these supermassive rockets, and they deemed them then to be too expensive, and they wanted to go towards reusable spaceships. So they came out with the space shuttle, which was launched on a rocket and then could glide home and land like an aeroplane. And so it was a reusable system, but the boosters that would launch it into space to get it through Earth's atmosphere were not reusable. And then it had limited functionality because it had a small payload, because it was basically needed to be able to glide back down to Earth. So the human race spent many, many years developing things that looked like aeroplanes because they decided that rocket technology was redundant. Elon Musk looked at space and decided that we needed to go back to rockets, and that the problem with rockets was that they weren't reusable. It became very expensive, and the reason they weren't reusable was you couldn't land them. So he came up with this insane concept of landing a rocket. I think that's kind of very similar to the approach that Ford was taking of how do we lower the cost of production. Musk decided that the way to lower the cost of rockets into space was to make them reusable. Everyone thought he was insane. You can't land a rocket. He keeps developing and progressing that, and then they have huge payloads. He's built these massive rockets now. So often what you'll find is a solution that was in the past, for example, rocket technology, is worth going back to. So when you're looking at your niche in any market, look not only at the competitors, what is Ford doing, why have they got their costs so low, I can't compete with them on cost, I can't build a better assembly line, but maybe by offering variation and variety, I can compete with them. Or what Musk was doing was saying, let's go back to how it used to be done because there was something right there, and let's fix the things that weren't working. So in both those examples, you've not got people with General Motors and with SpaceX coming up with radically new ideas, but they're adapting and they're responding to what's going on in the market. I think too often I speak to startup founders who become bogged down where they're not getting adoption, that they're unaware of the context historically of previous solutions that have been applied, for example, rocket technology, or why their competitor is so good. Ford was so good because their production lines were cheap. So in terms of what's the hardest thing to achieve in building a business, the concept thing is often focused on. That's what the founders get most enthused by. But really the magic bit, which is a thing to look at if you have any glitches, or even if you're doing really well, is how do we push this forward? So Ford ignored current demand, what the customers wanted. General Motors didn't. They offered segmentation and niche, but Ford had systemized to reduce costs and compete on price. So it wasn't that Ford had come up with the automobile, other companies, Mercedes, Daimler, etc., developed that. It was that he was ignoring established practices. You could say in many ways that Google had done this as well with indexing the world's knowledge, but he was very much focused on price and bottom line. General Motors focused on niche. What I see with SpaceX doing at the moment, they'd ignored, like Ford had done, current trends and demands, which was for aircraft style spaceships, and they went back to old technology to say, well, let's focus on that. What I'm sure you'll find SpaceX will do is they won't get caught out like Ford were, just stuck. They'll keep developing and iterating and come up with new ideas. Where Ford was obsessed with all his cars being black, Elon Musk's spaceships are often white, because white is the best heat resistant color. So when you have these rockets sat out on a runway building up loads of heat from the sunshine and from testing their engines, it's quite expensive to keep them cool, to cool them down all the time. So making them white is quite effective. He's now starting to make them silver, not painting them at all, because it reduces the weight and it's cheaper. So even when you've got to the extreme levels of cost that Elon Musk is involved, he's still taking a Ford-like approach to production and cutting costs, because that's how he makes stuff cheaper, and that's how he can sell products to other users who want to get into space. So always be focused on the bottom line, always be focused on the money. The segmentation and niche thing that General Motors did to outcompete with Ford is very much what Amazon have done. If you think of Amazon, if you go onto their marketplaces, you can buy food products, you can buy books, obviously, you can buy computers, you can buy almost anything. You can buy beds on Amazon. So they've offered this huge marketplace of segmentation with lots of niches in it. So don't get confused with Amazon as thinking, oh, they do all of everything. They're a massive platform. That's true. But all the individual sellers, 60% of Amazon's total sales are from independent third-party sellers who are specialized. So just because Amazon's got all of everything, it doesn't mean that the people making money on there are not specialized. Often they really are. It's very interesting when you look at, in 2022, Amazon's revenue, their online stores were the bulk of their money, but their growth in online sales was in 2022 was fairly similar to what it had been in 2021. Most of their growth was coming through other areas, Amazon Web Services, where they host websites, etc. They're developing their subscription services and things like that. You could see that in the original vision of Jeff Bezos, that the reason he started Amazon was he was enthused by the potential of online, of e-commerce. So he had a big vision, a big picture of where things were going. And then they've been able to incrementally add all these services, which are very complementary to them. There's nothing that they do there that doesn't involve parts of the process they're already in. You can see that with what Elon Musk is doing, that he has Starlink, the satellite company, and that's related closely to his SpaceX. And obviously, if you've got rockets, you can launch satellites. So think within your business. If things aren't going too well on what your core thing is, at the moment it's stalling in terms of online sales for Amazon. What are the other areas that you could develop that would be attractive to investors? I often find this is the area where startups need to speak the most to outsiders, to third parties, to say, hey, go in, be very humble, sit with someone. Doesn't have to be someone who's in the space of technology or music or whatever niche you're working in. Speak to someone that you respect, who's got a brain, and just say, hey, I'm working around this. What are the other things you can see around it? Who else could I serve? So keep your antennae open, keep your ears open, because at some point the investor's going to say to you, great, but what other businesses can we build? An interesting thing with what Amazon are doing, which kind of reflects what Ford did. With Ford were ignoring the demand for horses, SpaceX was ignoring the demand for aircraft style spaceships and went back to rockets. Amazon have got massive growth in physical stores. So Amazon have kind of decimated the high street, but they're then going back in there. I think this is a thing that startups and founders often overlook, that the business that you've disrupted, the business that you've taken stuff away from, there might be an opportunity once you've developed your expertise in your area of going back in to help them. There's certainly lots of potential for startup founders are not doing a good job of selling themselves as consultants to the businesses that they're trying to disrupt, and then becoming partners in that way. And then potentially you can find older businesses that could potentially invest in you. So a sort of brief summary of three of those things. Ford and SpaceX went away from what the perceived customer demand was and created demand. They said, we're going to do stuff uniquely. Whereas Amazon and General Motors looked at new efficiencies and competed on price and on specialization. General Motors offered a range of cars. Amazon offered a range of products. One of the key things that Jeff Bezos did, why did he go into books? It wasn't that he particularly loved books. It was that he wanted to be in the space of e-commerce and the development of the internet. So he took a lot of time looking at multiple opportunities to go online and build a store. This is a thing that I think a lot of founders get wrong, that I'll speak to somebody and they say, we've made this mousetrap to solve this problem. So we're going to build a better mousetrap that makes better coffee. And they fail to say, how would this technology be applied away from coffee into fruit and veg or something like that? I work with a Nashville startup that was built specifically for the music industry for managing licensing, publishing rights, which has had huge success in basically becoming a lumber market, commodities, fruit and vegetables, because they're just products that can be sold, bought and sold, like we were looking to buy and sell music rights. So Jeff Bezos looked at wanting to build in the internet space, and the reason he put on books was that the huge diversity of books. So at the time in 1994, Napster didn't come along till 1999. In 1994, there were about 200,000 CDs available at any given time in all the shops. So a range of 200,000 different products. In the book space, there were 3 million different books currently published, currently available, 1.5 million of which were in English alone. That's why Bezos made Amazon as a bookstore, because he saw this thing that General Motors have seen of saying we can offer specialization and niche. So he saw that as a really good way forward. The point I want to underline with what he was doing was he wasn't, I've got a solution for bookstores, or I'm going to make bookstores better. He was like, I understand how this technology works and I want to apply it. And then he picked the area he would apply it to. Too often I find, particularly in the music space, people will come at me with numbers on this total industry is worth such and such. They haven't looked into a small niche or sector that can be helped and disrupted. I think one of the best startups at the moment in Europe is focused exclusively on synchronizing music, licensing music to film and TV, synchronizing music with audio visual. So they've gone really into a niche space, like Bezos went into books. And every time I talk to them, I'm like, but you could apply this to any other area. And they're like, we don't care. We just want to get it right on sync. So if you are struggling at all with your proposition in getting adoption, and you believe totally in the technology or the solution, the mousetrap that you've built, maybe you should find a different niche sector to go into. And maybe that's not necessarily within music. So this is just like a brief history of e-commerce. So one of the early sites in 1994 was Pizza Hut created Pizza Net. So I think it's interesting that Jeff Bezos succeeded with Amazon, where others had tried with online bookstores, but they didn't have the functionality of Amazon. They were too glitchy and slow, like a dial-up bulletin board. Other people had tried pizzas. People tried auctioning, bidding on collectibles. So there were other people trying in niches. What Bezos understood was he picked a niche. He looked at 20 different niches and came up with books because it had more products than music. At the moment, Spotify it's in trouble. It's not doing well. It's nobody likes it. Sorry, the customers probably like it, but the people whose music is sold on there don't like it, and investors don't like it. It's really struggling to show a long-term value proposition for its share price. So it's interesting that Bezos picked books, and now he's across everything, and he also has a music service. So focus really, I think one of the things you could think about with music is niche, is genres and mood, not necessarily trying to do huge scale. I think where music is going is you'll get much more niche services building up that will specialize through communities, not through licensing all of music, all of everything. This is just a quick rush through of key things that I try and keep front of mind. So if I'm having a tough time with a startup, with a business, I'll often go through some of these ideas and say, what am I doing? So have we flipped conventional wisdom on its head recently? Are we just going into music companies or entertainment industry sectors and saying, we're going to do this differently and it's going to be better? Example of flipping conventional wisdom on its head was Elon Musk with his rockets, that everyone had discarded rockets and he went back to that. I think it's really, really essential that you get very bogged down as a founder of a startup into this is the way forward, this is the way we're going. Try and look at what the opposite to what you've done is and see if that helps. And often what it'll do by looking at what the opposite solution to your solution is, it'll make you more confident in your own solution. Explore extreme ideas. So don't be afraid of coming up with something that's really out of the box. And this goes back to the niche thing that I'm thinking all the time about adoption. If you can find early users to embrace those ideas, then you can slowly build up the mainstream. It's a ridiculous analogy because I just showed you how big the book market was when Jeff Bezos started Amazon, but he picked on a space where he got initial users, people who wanted to buy books online, which was a relatively small market, small section of the potential. This company I've mentioned before are focusing on licensing all of music. They're starting off with a small niche of sync. Find out a hub, a little area where you can enter. See what other people are doing. This is that point from earlier on about keeping an eye on your competition. If you're struggling to get investors, you're struggling to find out, to find customers, see if you can go in a different direction from what everyone else is doing. This comes back to that point about competition. I try and avoid competition. Who is your face? There's been a lot of discussion in the last few years of the Hollywood actor Ryan Reynolds, who's done a really good job of licensing his face, his brand to alcohol, to sports franchises, to mobile phone companies. And when he invests, he also then starts taking hold of the marketing, and his persona is happy-go-lucky, fun, entertaining, and people trust him. We had that trust word earlier. Make sure that whoever is representing your company, obviously it's not going to be a celebrity technologist like Elon Musk or an actual celebrity like Ryan Reynolds, but make sure that you're trusted and know within your plan who is the best person within the team to go out and speak to customers. It's very often not the person who's building the business. It's often not the lead engineer. So really think through, if you're not getting traction, who is representing you? Is it you? Are you the problem? The idea is great, but someone else could express it more clearly. One of the things I'm doing at the moment is talking too much. One of the things I find a lot of startup founders do when they have meetings, they won't shut up. They're so keen that you understand their idea and how passionate they are about it. They keep talking. Give space. You need someone who represents you, who gives space to the people you're talking to and who listens to them. Most companies fail because they double down on what's worked in the past instead of trying to make risky bets on the future. I really want to underline, I've said it a few times so far, that not enough European startups, not enough people within Hemi have done their research on who's already in that space, who's already making an effort there. So often adoption will not happen because there's already other people out there that the startup wasn't aware of. It's very difficult to take risky bets in the future if you just keep persistently trying to stick on the idea you had. So at the start of this talk we were talking about pivoting, changing direction. That kind of comes out of the blue and happens to you, that someone will be like, can't you do this or whatever. Don't think too hard about how do we pivot, how do we change direction, but do make sure that you aren't wedded all the time to the core idea and the core way you've been doing things. Go and get feedback. Who represents you? Are the customers, are the people who aren't buying from you telling you why? Are you listening to them? Don't get stuck on what's not working. There will be some aspect of what you're doing that's not working, and often rather than let that go, people will focus on that, and then you get a kind of death spiral with the startup. Dare to explore what others dismiss. So don't be afraid of going into the smaller niche sections. I think we've covered this in some of those examples before. My favorite one for the 10th time on this call is the Elon Musk going back to rocket technology. That was overlooked and people had dismissed it. But you also have with Nicki Minaj and Taylor Swift sell a huge amount of CDs. At the point where it became trendy to say that vinyl was making a comeback and everyone was trying to make collectible vinyls for music artists to make money, people said, oh, CD will never come back. And now CD's having its moment, and my secondhand collection of CDs is going to hit eBay fairly soon. There's certain artists that are selling in those spaces. Downloads, Nicki Minaj is like the most downloaded. She's not the biggest hip hop artist, but she's the most downloaded hip hop artist. So you can find spaces where not, for example, being a streaming platform, but looking at how you personalize downloads and how you add extra value. There's a company out of Norway will be doing some revolutionary stuff in that space next year. People have dismissed. Elon Musk said, you've all dismissed rockets. I'm going back to it. People are looking again at downloads, CDs, things like that. Apply that in the space that you're in, that you've come to disrupt. Also, rational solutions won't always get you to Mars. So what this means is, I referred earlier on to going in to try and sell products, services to companies, and they're just like, I don't want it. So you've solved their problem, and you can see that you've built a better mousetrap, and they're still not buying stuff off you. And you don't understand. I find this very often. Startup founders don't understand why the idiot across the desk who the startup has made this perfect solution for is not adopting that solution. Because they're expecting, too often founders expect their customer to behave rationally. So you should think irrationally sometimes in what you're building, but also try and encourage your customer to look at things differently. Often that's through small details, and try and really grasp and understand the complexity of the problems that you're addressing, because complex problems don't always have straightforward solutions. This is that point I just made, endless repetition, because it's really important you guys get it, that often you're coming along saying, look, we've solved this problem for you. And the person on the other side of the desk for you is like, well, it's not quite as easy as that. So for example, that would be the reason we don't do this is we should do that. That would work for that. But there's a number of other reasons why we're not even looking at it. It's not a priority, or why it wouldn't work within what we do. Do more research. All startups need to do more research on what is the problem that they think they've solved. If you think you've solved the problem with a straightforward solution, you probably didn't understand the problem. Again, just hitting that home. Complex problems don't have straightforward solutions. Be humble. Be prepared to go back, get feedback from your customers. What are you not getting? Not what are they not getting? The customer might know that they have a problem, but they might not prioritize it. And the final word on that just is adoption, adoption, adoption. Think at all points in your process, what are you doing? Why would the customer choose you? And that's that. Stop share. Has anyone got any questions or comments? No questions. Shall I pick on someone and ask if are any of you having problems? I won't pick on you. But is anyone out there at the moment who's encountered that thing which I'm referring to, which I've been on both sides of it, where you go in and you have a meeting and you say, hey, we've built this thing, it's really going to work for you. you should use it. Do you want it? And they're like, oh yeah, we don't really need it. Has anyone encountered that? I get it all the time.
Someone is speaking, but we can't hear you very well. It's somewhere far away. I don't know if others hear. No.
I think Paul wants to
No.
talk.
All right. Do you hear me?
Hey, Paul? Yes, we
Hi.
can. Thank you.
All
Good.
right. Small question. After Hemi, I had a little bit the idea that the most logical thing is first Hemi, then we go for a possible grant, and then when we grow up, we are going to investors. But I feel a little bit that why not go straight to investors to pitch the idea to them?
The only reason to delay going to investors is because you think you can borrow the money from bank of mum and dad or your credit card, or you take out a second mortgage or something. So you would retain as much equity as possible and avoid investors because you were convinced it was going to succeed. One of the things that people often overlook with investors is the knowledge that they can bring, the experience, and then the network that they have and the ability. One of the points I made was who is representing you. Very few startups send investors along for sales meetings. The investors often keen to come along and help and learn more about the process. So if we, rephrasing your question, is why would you not take an investor at the earliest possible stage? I think you're right. It's a valid question, but it also takes a lot of discipline, because the investor will then effectively start a clock running. Have you done what you said you were going to do? And you can find that in the world of grants and the way that you respond to grants and acquit success for grants is not necessarily the way the market is thinking. So go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I have the idea with the grant, you need to talk into their little schedule because it needs to fit in their European funding or whatever it is. And with an investor, I think, or at least I hope, that I will have, once I caught their attention, I can do my full story. I can open my complete book and talk whatever I want without being specifically talking what they want to hear.
Yeah. And be careful with, most investors have seen your idea before. And so be careful with going in there too, like, be aware that they may have more experience than you. And so go quite light on the idea that if they've got questions, they'll ask them. So I always leave stuff out if I'm trying to raise money, because then when they say, well, Paul, how are you going to solve that? Then you say, oh, I'm going to do this. Whereas if you go in and say, I've got all the answers, I've got everything fixed here. So what you're really trying to convey initially to an investor is, at a high level, this is where we think we can get adoption. This is where we think the customers are. This is why we've built this. Whereas with a grant, possibly what you're doing is you're saying this is why this is imaginative or why it's needed. And there's a subtle difference there. I think you're onto something important, but also you've really got to have your shit together to go to an investor, because they want money. They want a return on it.
And one last question, if I may.
Please.
I'm a small one-man business. I have some people around me who help me, of course, but located in Greece, which location is also important, especially with music, with rights, etc. How logical is it? Let's say I find an investor in another country, that we need to think, okay, how is this? It cannot be a one-man company forever. So what point is it going to grow, and what kind of company it will be easily? Which countries are the best for music? Are they the ones deciding this, or do I have a voice in this? Or I guess usually very little.
It's really, it varies. There's no rules. It might be that you found an investor who's a music producer who's moved to Jakarta, Indonesia, and understands that giant population there and has contacts there, and they might be able to very much apply a lead to where you go, for example, Jakarta Jazz. Or it might be that the investor's looking to get into entertainment technology, IP, and trust you implicitly and finds the whole thing fun. So there's a broad spectrum there. But I would definitely look for, if you can't find an investor, I would look for an advisory board early on who probably have some incentive, some equity if you can't pay them, who can help you with those things. So I would always be, some of the things I was saying while I was talking was about holding a mirror up to yourself. Like, is this idea that I had really good? What am I doing wrong? How would I go back and solve it without, in a different way? And that can be a real value of the people you build around you. So it's a very vague answer, but who the investors are and how much involvement they have varies case by case. But you should always go with the attitude that you seek their advice and you respect their advice, but you're not waiting on them to take you forward. So when you're at school, if you're not studying hard and you're falling behind in your exams, in theory, one of your teachers or a parent will pick you up and take you forward. You can't, with a startup, expect the investor to come in and be hands-on. They've probably got a bunch of other investments, and they might just put you down as a waste.
All right.
So
Perfect.
don't expect them to be the founder, the leader. You've got to keep that as your role.
Yeah.
And keep enthusing them.
Yeah.
And report often and frequently to them, but briefly, so that then when you do have a problem or you do want their advice, it's not the first time they've heard from you in 6 months.
Yeah. All right, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Forgot what I was gonna ask, but now I solved my technical problem. It was my headphones.
Good.
That's why I'm designing headphones, I guess.
You need a sound engineer, Maurizio.
Yeah, that's kind of my strength, right? I was wondering if you know any case in which I think it's morally reprovable somehow, or questionable at least, when you have private investors and you also still having an institution where I belong that is receiving public money. I see this very often. And one of the things that made me move out from this model is that all the things that we have tried to do as an NGO, nonprofit organization, ends up in a paper or in a publication, and I can't really finish it. But when I go to private sector, I immediately get attention to finish the thing. And some things need to be cooked in slow fire. So my question is, do you know any hybrid system that is not morally wrong or ethically even illegal? Because many things that I've seen and many people with whom I talk, I think they're borderline illegal, that they have receiving private, governmental or public funds and also getting private money. But I think that the balance between two of them, at least in Europe, it doesn't seem to be a healthy ecosystem. It seems like either is abusive on one side or on the other side. But there's very difficult. Things can take a couple of years to develop, and private sector is always pushing for them to finish it and immediately deliver a product that can, like you said, receives the money back. Whereas in the public funding, you get a very relaxed environment and nothing really ends up and nothing really finished and nothing really happens. So I don't know if there's any way to balance both areas in a way that you can.
It's impossible for you as an individual, or for you as a grant beneficiary, or for you as a startup with a private investor to raise this topic, because there's too many vested interests, too many people comfortable with the balance. Probably no one finds it perfect, but they find some way that it fits for them. the state of Walloon in Belgium has a launch thing tonight in London. They're launching an office here where they do a really good job of managing public and private partnerships. And what they tend to do is they put the money in with lower strings than you would see attached to a grant application, which has been an open process, and whoever's awarding the grants to some extent is blind or has no conflict of interests. Whereas what the city of Liège can do is it can be much more friendly towards, well, this business is promising to develop here or whatever. So I think there's a mix somewhere where you get government money, public money that's not necessarily come through a clear open grant process that can then, but that has a marketing value for a region or something that then combines very well with private money, where the private money is located in that area. The US model tends to avoid that, but the glaring exception where I kept going on about SpaceX is NASA. So that JFK was, and probably it was one of his predecessors, was like, we're going to go to the moon and we'll put a bunch of government money in it, a moonshot, because it's a ridiculous idea that is too risky for private investors. But then what you got was you got products developed from the moonshot by NASA, where they then engaged and hired private companies. So at the moment, they pay Jeff Bezos' space company, Richard Branson's space company, and Elon Musk's space company to deliver services to NASA. So I think that the Artemis mission, which is NASA going back to the moon in a couple of years' time, there's a competitive bid on who will service them. So I think you can find that balance where government says there's a greater good here. Elon Musk is involved potentially in a court case at the moment where he was an early investor in ChatGPT, which he said he was worried about AI, so he would make it a not-for-profit, and it's just gone for profit, and the CEO has got like suddenly worth like 4 billion overnight, and Elon Musk is threatening to sue them on that because he's like, it's not what you intended. So I think that very live current illustration shows you that nobody solved this. If Elon Musk and ChatGPT can't work out whether it's a private venture or it's a not-for-profit, I don't think it ever had any government money, but still. I think the opening comment I made to you is it's for people like you to surface and say, hey, this isn't working efficiently for us, but it's probably more likely for platforms like Hemi or trade associations to go back to, like Music Tech Europe, to go back to the European Commission, who are really smart and open. And I think they often respond to industry quite well. And I think maybe something Hemi can think about is anonymizing from all of your collective experiences this balance thing. And I don't think there's a simple answer to it, but it's a great topic to discuss.
Right. I think that you're spot on when you use NASA. I think it was Eisenhower before JFK, right. And probably that because he was a military guy. Yeah, but this is something that in the projects that I've been doing with public money from the European Commission as part of my job, of my daily job. It's very difficult because they fill the artists or the researchers with a lot of paperwork, like the way to validate that the research is done, not necessarily with the materialization of it. So, yeah, it's a bit complicated. And
a way that's kind of probably what Eisenhower was aiming at, which was a thing that the British did way back, was they wanted to solve the problem of telling time at sea. So they could use the stars to work out the longitude, but they couldn't work out the latitude without knowing what time that star would be in that position. Right. So they held a public competition. So private enterprise, free individuals had a competition to see who could have the most accurate clock sailing across the Atlantic. And I think the prize was like £1 million in 1750 or something, like huge incentive. Now, the tricky thing with that from a European Commission perspective would be you could probably do it in Germany or France. A rich country could put up money. Germany could say we're struggling with coal, we're behind on nuclear. France has got nuclear fusion, we want nuclear fission, and put up a big prize, and that would incentivize people to attack it. You then probably get disadvantages with smaller countries in Europe, such as Slovenia, and specifically the countries that HEMI is designed to support and help, wouldn't necessarily have the domestic resources to compete with German companies in trying to win a prize to make a clock or a spaceship or something.
Right.
So I think that it's interesting with what HEMI's trying to do is recognize the innovation, excellence, Nikola Tesla, the long history of the region in coming up with great ideas. I'd even put Vienna and therefore Einstein in the region, if not Austria, certainly Vienna. It's a disadvantage economically, so maybe the conventional systems don't work. But yeah, it's definitely, let's keep that chat going within the HEMI community.
An interesting one, yeah.
Because it's a great point that you're making, and Paul kind of touched on it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like either the private sector is not sophisticated enough to understand long-term projects, and it also looks like the public sector is only trying to satisfy the ideas of artists without really seeing the potential of having material things coming out. So there's a mismatch there somehow.
Yeah, and some awful art has been created that's of no value to the public.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it ends up in a paper and a proceedings of a conference that eventually gets quoted in a PhD thesis, right?
Yeah.
We have another question, Jorgos.
Please.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, Jake, thanks so much for such an inspiring keynote. I have somewhat of a relevant question, or at least irrelevant to the subject of the workshop. Good. You spoke about a rising sync company in Europe. I'm just curious to hear, what the company is, if you care to share their name.
They're fairly public. They're called Ringo. They're based out of Amsterdam with some German involvement.
Good. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. That was it.
I have one last question, if I may. I really liked this workshop. It was very good. And my question is, I really liked what you said about the adoption, that you have a solution for something and you think the people in front of you will think rationally, but they don't always do that. And you have to think irrationally. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate, apart from research and asking them, like, what is it you want? How can you work with this particular thing? Like, how can you...
I really appreciate, your question's very important, because it gets to the heart of what I was trying to talk about. And when I use illustrations like Amazon and SpaceX, it's kind of unhelpful. I deliberately chose them because if I use ones that are too close to home for the heavy community, then I think there may be, oh, that's what they did, we'll copy what they did. And it's like, no, the big picture, which is how you've just phrased your question. So let's say there's two people. There's the founder, and then on the other side of the desk, there's the buyer. So the investor's not in the room. The founder is trying to get the buyer to adopt the product, the service, or whatever. And the founder is convinced that they've solved the problem. And the buyer is like, I don't care. And so it's like, but this problem's worth 20 million a year to you, 20 million US. Oh, ultimately, we don't care. Like, thank you for the meeting. And they're not necessarily going to explain why they don't care. And the more the startup tries to repeat and go, no, you clearly don't get it. I've been in these meetings so many times where the startup, the person pitching, that they haven't got adoption or an immediate yes, they go into a sort of overkill mode. So if you can think of it in a romantic situation, I'm out on a date and she's not interested, and then I'm like, no, but I'm a really good guy. I'm doing like this, and I'm good with cats, and I, start over talking. It's really going to start burning just going to make the situation worse, less recoverable, because the other person on the other side of the table is switching off. So it's a balance that sometimes it's the person on the other side of the table is making a mistake. They're not seeing something. And then it's not necessarily that the seller has got it wrong, but maybe someone else needs to go along, or you need to moderate and do less sales and more ask them questions and more say, hey, I've built this thing. I think it's around where you're at. I'd love to try and work a bit on it with you, or can you tell me more about your problems? I see that a lot, that the seller, the startup, doesn't ask enough questions, doesn't listen enough, because they're so excited about what they've got. And then with the buyer, if they don't get it, then there may be complex reasons that they're not revealing. And often when I'm on the buyer side, the music industry, we've seen most of these ideas before. So there were bookshops online before Amazon. And famously, there were websites like MySpace before Facebook. So you don't have to be first. So it's not like if someone's saying, I've already seen this before, that doesn't mean that you can't make it succeed. It's like, okay, how do we reinvent this? So I've kind of talked too long on that, but the essence of the answer was in your question. You phrased everything perfectly. It's like, it's a complex emotional exchange. And if you're not getting immediate connection from the buyer, you probably need to adjust who is pitching, how you're pitching, and what you're asking them. And don't be afraid to go away for many months, like 4 or 5 months, and then come back to them and say, hey, we really appreciate what you said about that. We've kind of looked at it again. It's hard to give specific, concrete ideas other than you should assume that you're not doing it right as much as you should assume that they don't get it. It's more likely that they know why they're not doing it than they're too stupid to understand why they should do it. And it's hard to track why.
Thank you so much for the answer. I kind of know, but I also wanted to hear your take on it. You know, I'm not dealing with this so much in my company as much as I am at work, because I work at a corporate and I am dealing with like a delivery framework, management framework, and I'm you know, like implementing it with the team. And it's a really good experience, because as much as I love the idea and I really took this job with this, I want to do this. The reality is really hard, and I'm learning so much, like on a human level, how much I have to work with it, how much I have to integrate the feedback. But it's very hard to get the feedback, like you said, you know, to get them to talking. Like, why are the managers not accepting it? Like, and I'm struggling with finding the balance between confrontation out of authority, like, this is your job, like you have to tell me, you have to work with me, and out of like, am I going to block them? Is this going to fail? Like, how do I open these conversations? And it's like, you know, I'm getting feedback of like, you have to be softer, you have to go more like, understand their point of view. And it's a really interesting experience where even myself, I thought I would be so good at this, and it's still like a very straining thing to do, you know. So I'm searching for any ideas and like new angles to look at this, because
I think some of the reason you're finding it a strain is because you're good at it and you're aware that it's not going across. Because normally, if I'm sitting on the buyer side, the seller just goes into like, you don't get it, and they repeat it and they repeat it. They're like they're trying to hit me over the head with a hammer, and the seller therefore in that case is not aware that there's something not connecting. They're just like, I'll just keep repeating this. Like, what do you? Whereas you're aware that there needs to be some subtlety or variation in that, and then obviously it will vary case by case. What's their need? What's their priority? How busy are they? What type of person are they? So it's kind of like you're trying to open a safe, pick a lock, and it's not like, oh, you use this tool. But where you're at, which is way ahead of most people, but when I say most people, I don't mean that in a patronizing way, but about 80% of startups don't get it when they turn up with their idea, that we're like, yeah, we know that one, we've heard that before. What makes you different? And then they sort of don't really take that on board. You're way ahead of that. If you're like, okay, I'm going to crack this safe. I've tried this way. I need to find another way. What am I doing wrong? So you will eventually crack the safe, or it's quite possible that the buyer just they're mates with. I've had this before where people are friendly with their existing supplier. In music rights, often artists will stick with a publisher or a record label because they have a personal relationship, even though someone else could clearly do a better job for them. So there is often an irrational behavior from incumbent players. So on the talk I was doing, I was kind of saying, we'll try and find a niche or a small bit. So if the current person's not working in a supply situation conversation, maybe break it down for them and go, you know what, you're the senior person, and under you there's various departments. I want to deal with that little department there because I think I've got, of all my massive mousetrap that solves everything, maybe this little component will fit. So maybe try and, without disrespecting them, without removing them, say, hey, can I just speak to your junior person on this one piece, but make it smaller?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's got a lot to do with integrating the whole team on many layers. And they're quite resistant to it for many reasons. There's like a standing system of like a compensation based on my own personal performance and no one else's. So I don't have to work with the team, which has other reasons why it's not working. So there's got a lot of layers. And I think what we are finding ourselves at is that what we have in place, and I've been here for 6 months, is this was a proof of concept. This was a concept. We've done a pretty good job. We've learned so much, but now we have to reassess, come back and now let people in and say like, okay, tell me all the things you don't like about it. Tell me all the things you need solved, and then reiterate and reintegrate it. So like I'm trying to find that I'm actually having to confront my boss and telling him like, you have to back up a little, because if I don't let these people in, it's not going to work, right? And so it's interesting. It's a really interesting thing to do on so many levels, So yeah,
beautiful. Where you just described that you're having to manage, as well as the customers, you have to manage your boss.
Yeah.
Think of that as well in a startup situation. If you're the founder, that do what you've just done is detach mentally and say, okay, I am the boss, but put that aside and go like, what is it that I'm not getting? So it's very easy for you that you get it. You're in the middle between the boss and the buyer. And you can see, you've just described it, that there's things aren't quite right on both sides. And so you're going to try and adjust both sides. It's great. It's a puzzle. And it's adoption. What you're talking about is adoption. How do we get them to adopt it? Which is a great note to underline, that you're not saying, we had this amazing idea, we built this thing, the price is right. You're at the hard part. And too few startups think about that. How do we get them to adopt it at an early enough stage? They tend to be just like, well, we'll just build this thing and then everyone will get it.
Yeah, this is a very technology heavy company, and developers and these people, they're very logical, and they're very like, they will build you the most complex thing and explain and explain. And I'm like, if you want people to use it, you just have to like then rescale it down and make it simple to use, like because otherwise, if we have like 10 million pages of descriptions, they're not going to read it. They need to understand how to use it, like, and not have to think about it, like how we got here anymore. That's how I feel. I think that it's a very interesting experience in this. Like, how do you build the product, and then how do you actually make it into something like an iPhone that you don't have to know how it came together, but you love it because it's super easy to use, right? And it's got all these cool features and things you don't need, but you love them. So yeah, it's a
Have
really
you seen
interesting.
that movie, The Founder, about the
I don't think
McDonald's
so.
guy? It's got some Hollywood actor in it. It's a great movie for exactly what you're describing, that basically it's a true story, that the guy was a milkshake salesman, kept visiting the original McDonald's store and was saying to McDonald's brothers, you've got an amazing concept here. and eventually he managed to work with them and get control and scale it. But they didn't understand what they had, and he had to go in and sort of go like, no, with exactly what you're describing. It's like, how do we communicate this and adjust it? And so your software engineers don't necessarily understand. They're like, I've built the perfect piece of software. I've built the perfect hamburger. And it's like, yeah. But we need to simplify it. But one of the innovations McDonald's did when they scaled out was they had a really simple menu.
Yeah, I really like reading these books about how different companies came about, you know, like Nike and different, like Netflix and Spotify, like the different culture of thinking that is behind it all. It's all of that, like each of those could only come to be because there was a specific way to manage people and way to sort of bring it all together. It's really interesting to study this and like pick pieces from what you like and what resonates with you and how you can bring it together, because that's how you find a niche, right? You get inspiration and then you start seeing things. So yeah, this was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? One last one? No? If not, I think we can wrap it up for today. Do you want to add something, Jake? Something more?
I just liked with the 3 questions, everyone was they weren't really questions. It was 3 illustrations of we're trying to solve these problems. Investors quitting where the money's come from, satisfying that, getting adoptions, getting sales. And as the 3 of them, Maurizio, Marie, and Nick, were saying, it's kind of tough and it's organic. And so don't be afraid when things aren't running really smooth. They're not going to run smoothly. It's only in the rear view mirror that you can tell the story of how it became successful. But by being humble, as our 3 questioners were, that they're all doing a great job, but they're being very humble and saying, oh, I wonder how this works. It's like, don't be dogmatic. Don't get too married to your opinion. Be prepared to challenge yourselves. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Jake, for this
Thanks,
really
everyone. Thank
great
you, man.
insights about the processes of or the challenges of startups. I hope you all had something to pick for yourself from tonight's workshop, and wish you all a lot of luck and resilience to keep on pushing your projects forward, and see you around. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.